We're glad to be here today. This is the third edition of our social justice conversation here at Essex County College. My name is Dr. Akil Kalfani. I'm the director of the Africana Institute and the chair of the Social Justice Council, as well as we haven't gone anywhere this year, but I'm also the director of the Center for Global Education and Experiences. COVID has clipped our flying wings, but students have been asking. We've even had students apply for some programs over the summer. I hope that the ones they're applying for, that they get to travel to. There's a program that they're trying to get onto that's a free program for the summer, but we'll see. There's all this a wait and see. But we ask everybody to stay safe and to continue to understand that we are here talking about how we push this agenda. Today, we're reflecting on how we've come to understand what happened, the awakening, what happened over last year and before. What is this driving force, this momentum that we have that's led us to a place where we have an understanding of how do we change this world that we're in? And not only do we change it, but the first week we dealt with, let me take a step back. For the first week we dealt with King, right? This was the radical king. And we wanted people to understand that the king of I Have a Dream was not the only king that there is to know of. In fact, he talked about, and we played this clip from him, and he said that he thinks that maybe he led his people into a burning house. If you think about that, and he said that he was changing his idea and that we need a revolution of ideas. So we went from there. And last week, we talked about the power of one and the power of an individual to make impact and change. And so that every single person has the power to make change, that you have the power to make change. But now, and we talked about, there was somebody who made in the comments that's talking about that people can make positive or negative change. And we said, yes, all of those things are possible. But we want to talk about the positive change and how we are striving for and looking for examples of that kind of positive change. Here today, we're going to be talking about the awakening. What is this? What are the things that emerge that create this spark for the change, this spark, this flame for the change, and then what keeps it burning? So we have some folks who are going to talk today who are going to help us to understand about keeping that flame burning. Others, some young folks who are going to talk about what they did last year as a part of that flame burning. And we are going to strive to really push the envelope so that we can see what they were talking about and the things that they were moving us through in terms of this whole agenda of moving forward. I want to start off today. We're going to play this really brief poem, and then we're going to have one of our stalwart community servants who has been working tirelessly in the community, and not just tirelessly in the past, but continuingly tirelessly. So I'll introduce him formally in a moment, but tell me if you know who this young lady right here is.
When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? The loss we carry, a sea we must wade. We've braved the belly of the beast. We've learned that quiet isn't always peace. In the norms and notions of what just isn't always just is. And yet the dawn is hours before we knew it. Somehow we do it. Somehow we've weathered and witnessed a nation that isn't broken, but simply unfinished. We, the successors of a country and a time where a skinny Black girl descended from slaves and raised by a single mother can dream of becoming president, only to find herself reciting for one. And yes, we are far from polished, far from pristine, but that doesn't mean we are striving to form a union that is perfect. We are striving to forge our union with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gaze not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first. We must first put our differences aside. We lay down our arms so we can reach out our arms to one another. We seek harm to none and harmony for all. Let the globe, if nothing else, say this is true. That even as we grieved, we grew, that even as we hurt, we hoped, that even as we tired, we tried, that we'll forever be tied together, victorious, not because we will never again know defeat, but because we will never again sow division. Scripture tells us to envision that everyone shall sit under their own vine and fig tree, and no one shall make them afraid. If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promised glade, the hill we climb if only we dare it, because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it. We've seen a force that would shatter our nation rather than share it, would destroy our country if it meant delaying democracy. And this effort very nearly succeeded. But while democracy can be periodically delayed, it can never be permanently defeated. In this truth, in this faith we trust, for while we have our eyes on the future, history has its eyes on us. This is the era of just redemption. We feared it at its inception. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter to ourselves. So, while once we asked, how could we possibly prevail over catastrophe? Now we assert, how could catastrophe possibly prevail over us? We will not march back to what was, but move to what shall be, a country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. Our blunders become their burdens. But one thing is certain: if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left. With every breath from my bronze-pounded chest, we will raise this wounded world into a wondrous one. We will rise from the gold-limbed hills of the west. We will rise from the wind-swept northeast, where our forefathers first realized revolution. We will rise from the lake-rimmed cities of the Midwestern states. We will rise from the sun-baked south. We will rebuild, reconcile, and recover in every known nook of our nation, in every corner called our country. Our people, diverse and beautiful, will emerge battered and beautiful. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it. For there is always light, if only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it.
All right, I hope you know who that young lady was, Amanda Gorham. She's did a beautiful job at that poem. And as we continue our program here today, we have a brother who now is going to step up to the spotlight, and he's going to share with us some words of wisdom for his tenure as the chairman of the People's Organization for Progress, and for his tenure as a stalwart change agent in New Jersey. We welcome Lawrence Ham, who was the youngest member of the Board of Education for the city of Newark, and a former candidate for U.S. Senate here in New Jersey, running for U.S. Senate, and now a continued hard worker. Even though the with COVID out there and everything else, he's still been socially distancing, but rallying, protesting, and he's someone who's going to help us to think about that continued legacy. So without further ado, I give you Brother Larry Ham.
I was so enthralled with Amanda Gorman that I did not position myself correctly. I'm on the road and I'm in the car, and the sun, was shining directly on me. So I thought I should move the car around so that people could see me not as a spot of light. But thank you, Dr. Kalfani. I'm honored that you would ask me to say a few words, a few introductory remarks to your social justice convention today, and how fitting that you should start off with the poem, the words of that magnificent poet, Amanda Gorman. I'm going to tell you the truth. I don't know if you can tell it or not, but it seems that I'm still enthralled by her, and just hearing that poem brings tears to my eyes. Even now, we're more than a month, well, not quite a month yet, just under a month since she first read it at the inauguration of President Biden. And just to say, and I know you've covered this already and we'll cover it again, how important the arts are in the struggle for Black liberation, in the struggle for social justice in general. Many a movement has been kept going by the music and the art of cultural workers infused with that revolutionary spirit. I came into the movement at the age of 17, and at that age, I came under the influence of Amiri Baraka, that is the poet, playwright, activist of many years here in Newark, New Jersey, who passed away several years ago, and who is the father of the current mayor of Newark, who is Ras Baraka. Amiri Baraka was seen as the father of the Black arts, of the contemporary Black arts movement that ran parallel to the Black Power movement of the 1960s. And I can't tell you how, in moments of despair, I would open one of the books of Amiri Baraka and read one of his essays or his poems or his speeches, and was inspired to go forward. As a student activist, particularly when I was at Princeton University, I'm going to tell you that people like Bob Marley helped me graduate because I can't tell you how difficult, how challenging it was at Princeton. It's probably challenging for every student, no matter what college they're at, but I was particularly challenged. And, it was the music of Bob Marley and of Gil Scott-Heron. Particularly, I want to mention Gil Scott-Heron. I hope young people who are not familiar with him will rediscover him. Much of his work, many of his albums and songs and poems are on YouTube. And Gil Scott-Heron was probably the foremost artistic spokesperson during that anti-apartheid era. His song, "What's the Word, Johannesburg," was really the anthem of the anti-apartheid movement during the years that I was at Princeton, from 1971 to from 1974 to 1978, and really from 1974 to 1980, because I did 2 years of graduate work. And the anti-apartheid movement was going then and was still going when I left Princeton University in 1980. And I saw somebody put in the chat, "We almost lost Detroit." Yes, that's by Gil Scott-Heron. There's a lot of stuff by Gil Scott-Heron. I hope people will take time to discover his work. And that brother really didn't get the due that he should have. He was really one of the forerunners to rap music and everything else. Almost all of Gil Scott-Heron's music. When I say almost all, I mean it. Even the music that was not overtly political, it had a positive message, whether it was about love between a man or a woman, or love between people, and love for our children. And even in that, the message was positive, but his music was very political. So I just say that as a footnote to that poem that Amanda Gorman read at the inauguration. I'm so glad that people are having this social justice convention. Dr. Kalfani informed me that this was the third one. I didn't know about the first and the second one. So I'm glad to see that people are still having political.
Seems as though Mr. Ham is having a little technical difficulty. We'll give him a moment.
Was the convention's up? Am I unfrozen yet? How's that?
Yeah, you're back. Yes.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, well, I better talk fast before I freeze up again. I just want to say to the students today that it's so important that you continue to fight. I know many of you participated in the marches that we had for George Floyd and other victims of police brutality. And as a result, some 20 million people across the United States, in all 50 states, participated in demonstrations for George Floyd. And as a result, legislation was introduced in Congress and in state legislatures and in city councils across the country for police reform. But almost none of them have been passed. Those legislations were introduced because people were in the streets. People have gone back to sleep. And so the legislation is kind of just sitting there now. So spring is coming very soon. And I hope with the return of spring, it will mean the return of students to the streets in protest against police brutality and other issues of importance. Police brutality is not the only important issue of the day. There are many important issues that we should be protesting around. We have been having, for a while, we were having daily protests across the street at the Lincoln statue. And now we're having them every Monday in front of the federal building to protest police brutality. We call it Justice Mondays. And we're there from 4:30 to 6. The only exception is if we have bad weather. If it's a snowstorm or it's raining, we don't want people to come out there and get sick, particularly in this era of COVID that we're in right now. But we have been participating in these Justice Mondays for 5 years. We started on February 1st, 2016, and we passed the 5-year anniversary February 1st of this month. People often ask the question, do these protests do any good? Absolutely. As Frederick Douglass said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. I will paraphrase him and say, if there is no protest, there is no progress. Protest is a form of struggle. So if there's no protest, there's no progress. Protest creates an environment in which other things can happen. Protest helps to build popular support for whatever campaign you're protesting about. Like right now, everywhere I go, people tell me, they say, yeah, we see you on Broad Market. We see you in front of the federal building because we do voter registration every Saturday on Broad Market from March through November before the general election. So we'll be back out there on Broad Market in March to start voter registration again. So we do voter registration on Saturdays. We do Justice Monday protests on Mondays. And these protests have an impact. They create an environment that's sympathetic to what you're doing. They build support for whatever cause you're protesting about. And it takes time. There's no cause that is won in a day. If most people celebrate the moment something big happens, like, in June when the Civil Rights Act was passed in 64, in August of 65 when the Voting Rights Act was passed. But people don't see the decades of work that preceded those that helped to make that change happen. Most social justice movements are protracted struggles, meaning that they are movements that take place over a long period of time. Sometimes social justice movements are intergenerational. The movement starts out with one generation, and it may take two, maybe three generations before the goal of that social justice movement was accomplished. If we look at the struggle against slavery as a social justice movement, it took 244 years if we only count from the time that slavery was here in the continental United States, then in what was called colonial America. Before there were states, these places were colonies. And as many of you know, 1619 is when the first Africans came on White Lion to Port Comfort on the East Coast in Jamestown, Virginia. But those who are real scholars of Black history know that that wasn't the first time enslaved African people were brought to America. As early as the 1500s, I believe 1523, the Spanish were in South Carolina and had tried to set up a colony, which ultimately failed, and the enslaved African people escaped. In Florida, as early as I believe 1523 in St. Augustine, the Spanish had a colony. Florida wasn't even absorbed completely by the United States as a state until after the Civil War. One of the longest acts of resistance against enslavement was that of the Seminole people. Seminole is used to describe indigenous people down there in Florida, but it's actually a Spanish word that means runaway, because many enslaved Africans escaped from the surrounding states like Georgia and Mississippi, South Carolina, and they went to Florida and they lived with and became part of the indigenous people, and in fact, kind of made a new people in the process. So what I'm saying is that it's important to understand the role of protest, that protest is important, that protest is really what is one of the engines of change. There are others like voting and like boycotting. There are many weapons that we have in our arsenal of social change. You don't think that there's just one. There are many, and we must learn to use all of them together. So the last thing I want to say is that we know many people came out for George Floyd, came out for Breonna Taylor, but look, Officer Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, hasn't gone to trial yet. No one has gone to trial yet for the murder of Breonna Taylor or Ahmaud Arbery. So, even though we did well last summer with the massive protests across this country and in New Jersey, and I take my hat off to the Black Lives Movement and its adroit use of social media to help mobilize people throughout the country. But we can't go back to sleep. We have to keep the pressure on. People are still being killed by the police. There's a new case almost every week. We just haven't been hearing about it recently because the stage was taken over more recently by the white supremacist, fascist, racist coup attempt. People tried to overthrow the Congress, tried to stop the certification of the electoral vote and the recognition of of Biden as the president of the United States. So the struggle for police reform still continues. We're going to have a major struggle. Does that mean I should stop? Are we still there?
No. Go ahead. I'm just setting up the thing. This is all part of the process. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I thought that was your signal to me that I need to shut up.
Not at all. You got about another 3 or 4 minutes.
No, I'm just trying to say that we have not achieved what it is we set out to achieve last summer. We got it started in a big way and in a good way. It was wonderful what happened. I was so glad I lived long enough to see. I didn't know that. I was almost thinking we were not going to see demonstrations like that again. And some of the biggest demonstrations the People's Organization for Progress ever had, was last summer, this past year. From May 30th all the way through August, we had some of the biggest demonstrations we've ever had. So I hope that we'll see that again. But the point I was trying to make just before we went off was that we're going to have a major struggle for voting rights. The demography of the United States is changing. If this is already a country with huge numbers of people of color, African Americans, Latinos, Chicanos, Asians, indigenous people, Native Americans. And by 20, I just heard this morning. I've heard it before, but it was on television again this morning on the radio, that by 2042, this will no longer be a predominantly white country. And people who are in power realize this, and those who are reactionary, ultra right wing and right, who cannot the fact that the future of this country will in fact be a multiracial democracy, who want to try and maintain some type of system of racial apartheid in this country, they are going to do everything they can to prevent that from happening. One of the ironies that we see right now, more than nearly 60 years since the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, is that Black people's voting rights and civil rights are almost as endangered today as they were 60 years ago. In the aftermath of Biden's victory on November 3rd, Republican-controlled state legislatures around the country have have introduced more than 200 bills whose objectives are to, in fact, suppress the Black vote and the vote of other peoples of color. Because change is coming, and the forces of reaction who want to maintain the status quo, they're going to do everything they can to prevent change. But those of us who must have change, because build the movement to push this change. I was only supposed to make a few introductory remarks. So I'm going to stop right here. I don't know if people want to ask me questions or if that's even part of the program to ask me questions. Dr. Alfani invited me.
We have questions. If you can hang with us, we're going to have questions a little bit later on. So if you can hang with us, we'll be glad to have you.
Okay, I'll hang on for a little while.
Right here, I want to just remind you, maybe if any of you came on late, that you just got through hearing Larry Ham, the chairman for the People's Organization for Progress. We thank him for his participation, and give him a virtual round of applause, if you will. We're in new times and having new ways to navigate that space. So coming up next, we have another a person who's been there. I'm glad he's coming after you, because he's an actor, a singer, songwriter, and a musician, but he was also involved in the struggle last year. And so Mustafa is going to come on and talk to us for a few minutes. But he had a festival called the Kemet Music Festival, which was a festival that involved music, but also involved protest, involved statements to the public about how to bring about change. And here you are someone he was at a bunch of other events working and pushing the envelope. So for someone who's pushing the envelope and helping us to think differently, we bring to you now Mustafa. Mustafa, can you come on and help us out?
I can come on if you'd like me to, absolutely. How was everybody today?
Good.
Ooh, beautiful. It's nice to see everybody. Glad to see you. All right. So first of all, thank you to Dr. Akil. I met him actually, funny enough, at one of the earliest protests back in June. And I believe it was the East Orange protest that we went to. And I kind of recognized him because a couple of good friends of mine actually took his classes, and I'm actually very astute, maybe at one point or another, to take his class myself practically. But just to give a little background about who I am. So yes, I am an actor, singer, songwriter, musician. Actually, Essex County College is where I started my education outside of the K through 12 system. I graduated with a liberal arts degree in 2013, then proceeded to go to Montclair State University to study theater, and got my BA degree in the theater studies program and graduated 2015. I believe I made honor roll a few times, but that's besides the point. So basically going about the 2020 year. So obviously nobody expected the pandemic until literally it was announced ill-willingly by our government. And they obviously knew from 2019, but we don't have to go there. And probably one of the biggest setbacks for me as an artist was to try to figure out what I needed to do in order to, first of all, communicate my thoughts, my feelings, my emotions, and yet still be able to somehow, some way figure out a way to not just financially be compensated, but also figure out a way to still make people, especially those of mental health issues, still be able to receive something to make them not only feel good about themselves, but also uplift themselves and saying that everything would be all right. So I started virtually performing on social media. I did it old school way. So in other words, have two phones in front of me and pretty much just virtually have concerts all the time. And I was reaching people not just in the US, but also reaching people worldwide, which is a very beautiful thing in my view. And of course, leading up to May, on Memorial Day, we all know what happened with George Floyd. And of course, the media, as well as Breonna Taylor's story, was becoming to light. And this had a huge effect on me because up until this point, I knew about Black Lives Matter and I knew about all the Black activist movements because me coming from a background of activism, you know, my father, ironically enough, was of the Vietnam War generation, served 6 months, came back, was honorably discharged. Him being a conservative Christian, while my mother being a libertarian, I'm sorry, not libertarian, she was a liberal. And she, you know, kind of gave me this sort of kind of attitude of, you know what I mean? There's some things in this world that does not seem right and you need to question everything. So that's exactly what I did. And coming from a father who's dark-skinned man and a mother who's Caucasian, there's also this aspect of I also know what not to say and when to say it, especially when it comes to our Caucasian co-conspirators, especially when we're working a relationship with people that are actually for us and not against us. I've met a lot of people who are very skeptical of people who are our Caucasian brothers and sisters that are for us and that see that there is such a thing as white supremacy as well as white hate groups that are rising, especially within our law enforcement, as well as our educational systems, our churches, everywhere. So basically, after the June 2nd Blackout Tuesday events that I went to in, I believe, New York, and then I think I went back to Clifton, New Jersey, I started to have an inspiration to write. And again, for a lot of artists, especially for myself, who also battles with mental health, specifically ADHD, depression, and anxiety, I had to just let Holy Spirit come through and just hopefully I'll be able to just write about the wrongs that I was hearing. So basically I took it old school. I read newspapers. I read up and coming facts that were coming in. I watched video footage consistently of the incidents that were happening, whether it be George Floyd, whether it be Breonna Taylor, whether it be Ahmaud Arbery, Jacob Blake. All these videos were just suddenly coming out, and first and foremost, it was overwhelming for me to see this, not just as a young man, but also to see this as a Black man in America, feeling that after all the things that we have as a community and as an activist organization and organizations have been fighting for since literally the inception of the Emancipation Proclamation, it's really been a journey and a learning experience for me to realize that freedom doesn't necessarily mean free, but it means freedom needs to be everything for everybody, everywhere, anywhere. So writing the album, I'm still actually still raising funds for the album. It's going to be called Black is Beautiful, and it relates to Black love. It relates to community. It relates to what's happened with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. And I could summarize this by saying that by going to the Blackout Tuesday protests, I had a feeling and an obligation to learn as much as I can possible about every community that can possibly get to. So within the summer months, as well as going into the early fall months, I traveled all across New Jersey extensively, went to different parts of New York as well as Pennsylvania to really discover the plight and the conditions of what is happening in Black and Brown America. And unfortunately, it's not a pretty sight. And to me, I didn't look at it as a political issue. I looked at it as a human rights issue. And unfortunately, because of the politics that we inherit and that we have to abide by in order to make change in the world, we also realize that change is not just what happens on a federal and state level, it also happens on the local level. And the local level, in a lot of ways, influences the state and federal levels. Dr. Akil, I believe, was running for Congress, and he made such a speech at one of the rallies, I believe, in Jersey City. And he was a very influential speaker as well as activist wanting to make change in our government. And by the way, just because he lost doesn't mean that he lost. Trust me, we're winning bit by bit, toe by toe, brick by brick. So I just want to encourage everybody that's on here, especially students, to understand that you're not limited by what you think that you don't have. You're only unlimited by what you believe you can make and what you can make. So I just want to encourage everybody here to really understand that there's a lot more to be done. You can give anything and everything to this movement. It doesn't mean that you put yourself in a position to burn your candle with both ends. What it means is that just take it one day at a time, one message at a time, one person at a time, one change at a time. So I just want to thank Dr. Akil for having me on here. And I definitely want to encourage any artist that is in a struggle right now to just let you know that, trust me, there's some pot of gold at the end of the rainbow for us all.
Very good. Very good. Thank you very much, young brother. I appreciate you. Keep the struggle going. Larry Ham just gave you a pound fist so you can keep it moving. Also, we're gonna have a young sister to come up in just a minute, but I want you to watch this real quick about why we protest.
We have a long history of systemic racism in America, but its root is established deeply here in our city, right here in Dallas.
The harvest of unrest in our communities today grows from a seed planted at our nation's founding. It was the early promise of freedom for all, a promise that did not apply if you were Black.
Their job is to protect our communities, and they're not doing that. They're literally killing us. How are you going to keep killing unarmed men? How many more people does it take?
We're tired of being victims. We're tired. We're oppressed. We've been oppressed for years. Enough is enough. Now, either you can help us or you can be against us. But we're going to do the same thing.
These men and women taking to the streets are part of a long line of Americans, Black, white, and brown, who've protested a long legacy of racial inequality.
We don't get it, shut it down! We don't get it, shut it down! We don't get it, shut it down!
To see that we're not in this fight by ourselves, because it's so often, I know for the last 15 plus years that I've been out here, all of the protests that I've ever gone to, it's always us as African American alone.
My belief in God fuels my action and concern and love for people.
This evening is about justice for the inequality of Black people in our system.
These past few nights, nonviolence has been the tool of choice for most people, but as we've seen, certainly not the tool of choice for all.
If you don't come in love, hate is gonna come. That's enough said, man.
The peaceful part isn't as important for me, but the main goal is to be heard, to have justice.
It's like if you stick a wounded dog so many times, eventually he gonna bite, right?
We're tired. It's that simple. We're tired. So until we get justice, we're going to keep doing this. We're gonna keep doing this. We're gonna make them work.
So the point is that we got to make sure that people understand that there's continued pushing, there's continued push for change, and that we need to be sure that as we're pushing for change, others recognize that the push for change is going to be met with resistance. And the prime example of resistance in the state of New Jersey is the People's Organization for Progress. And we have the chairman here. So it's good to see that we have this. And I want to encourage students, especially once we get back into session, that that POP protests every week right outside the building. If you want to be engaged in the struggle, if you want to learn how to struggle, maybe you don't even participate the way they participate, but if you want to go learn how to struggle, touch bases with POP. All the members are there. They got a meeting every Thursday. So that gives you an opportunity to learn how to be engaged and understand the reasons for the continued struggle. Larry, what's the date and time of the meetings that you guys have?
We meet every Thursday at 7 p.m. Our meetings are Zoom meetings because of the COVID crisis that we're in. I look forward to the day when we will return to the in-person meetings, but for now, the meetings are on Zoom. And if you call 973-801-0001, we will direct you how to get on the Zoom call for those meetings every Thursday. Every Thursday at 7 p.m. Every
Can you say the
Thursday at
number
7
again?
p.m.
Can you say the number again?
The number to call is 973-801-0001.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank
Now
you.
we have a young sister. Her name is Amira Jabbar. I'm going to ask her to come on screen now. She's a brilliant young sister who is a New Jersey native, but she doesn't. She's not here going to school in New Jersey. So she's going to talk a little bit about where she goes to school, but then she's also going to talk about the struggles that she was engaged in here in New Jersey over the last year. She has an organization that she founded called Let's Walk to Justice. Amira?
Okay. Hi, everyone. Dr. Kalfani, I just want to thank you for inviting me to speak today, especially on this topic that's very much needed. So this summer of 2020, it was very, very different. Like Dr. Kalfani already mentioned, I am a New Jersey native. I'm from Newark, New Jersey. I go to school at Morgan State University, which is in Baltimore, Maryland. There, I am a member of the National Council of Negro Women. I'm also a member of the NAACP, the Morgan State chapter, and also the former president of the Student Social Work Organization, which is my major currently. And I am an MSW candidate at Rutgers University for 2021, the summer of 2021. So that last summer, Let's Walk to Justice was formed, literally, it was birthed out of the protests and everything that was happening. It began, me and a few friends, we seen everything that was going on, and we had no choice. It was almost as if it was a call to action. We had to do something. Too many people were silent. Too many people didn't speak up. Too many voices were going unheard. And so it was me and 3 other friends, and we decided to hold a protest. We didn't have any connections to any larger systems or anything. It was just us, and we didn't know how far it would go. We're like, whether or not it's just us 4 marching or whether or not we're able to bring out 10, 20 people, we'll be happy about it because we get the opportunity for people to show their voice and to protest. And so it was my first time ever participating in a protest. And we met on the intersection of Broad and Market, downtown Newark at 12 p.m. The week after George Floyd was brutally murdered. We met on that intersection, and at first it was about 10 of us, and we just started marching. I just briefly introduced myself, they introduced themselves, and the point was to march down to City Hall, and on the steps of City Hall have different individuals, give them the opportunity to speak about what it means to them, not only to be Black in America, but what it means to them to seek justice and equality. What does that mean? What does that look like to us? Because so many times we talk about equality, but when it comes to the why of it, like why are we seeking this? Why do we want this? It looks different to all people. So that was definitely a platform for young people to come out and use their voices to serve as a catalyst for change. And so on this topic today of personal consciousness to collective action is really important to me. Consciousness itself is the state of being awake and aware, right? So one person is awake and aware. I was awake and aware. And my friends, we're all ready. I'm like, okay, it's time to wake the people up. So at that time, we're using our collectivity to be able to mobilize a larger group of people. So at that point, it was like, we just have to keep it going. We have to keep this momentum going. We're young people, we're students, we're in school, and this is going to affect not only our lives, but the lives of our children in the future. So when we did that, we ended up bringing out more than 5,000 people. And so it was huge. Like, it kind of caught me off guard in a way, because that was the first time I had this big mic in my hand. I'm sitting here talking. It was the first time ever. And I'm just like, wow, like, is this like really happening? It was definitely an eye opener. And so I can definitely say that the protests happened last summer sparked in so many people the inner activist in them. You can have it in you, but it may not always show. But during that time, everyone was fed up, everyone was upset. So you had no choice but to show it. And so when it comes to collectivism and collective action, if I was to walk down the street by myself, with my fist in the air, you know, chanting Black Lives Matter, people might look, they might do a little honk, that's nice. But when the I turns into we, and we all as one, as a unit, march and chant together, it serves a much larger purpose. And so something different that we've seen this summer, it wasn't necessarily just protests, rallies, and demonstrations. It was more so international anger. So the onset of COVID-19 pandemic, we're quarantined. So you have all eyes that are watching. Everyone's looking at their screens. We're in the house. We don't have that choice. We can't just scroll past it. You're seeing it live, and everyone is looking, and that is what's different. So I can say that the summer of 2020 was huge. It probably was, if not the largest historical movement in the United States. It was definitely big. And so to be a part of that, it meant a lot. There was not a single state in the United States of America that didn't have at least one demonstration. And so this is the first time that this is ever happening, having protests all over the world, the UK, New Zealand, Denmark, Syria, the Netherlands, Germany. So like, just to see that so many other people that don't look like us necessarily, are still using their voices to fight for us. And I can say that the use of social media had a very strong influence of getting the word out. So when Let's Walk to Justice first formed, we used social media as a platform to be able to get the word out there. So we started making flyers. We're like, okay, guys, we're going to meet up at this place at this time, and we are going to demonstrate. We're going to walk and we're going to march right in the streets, and everyone's going to see it, because it's important to be seen. It's important to be heard. And so since the death, this has been happening since the very beginning of time. But when Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, at that time, it was literally in the middle of the pandemic. So at that point, you had to pay attention. We protest as a means of a political intervention in a world where Black lives are systematically and intentionally targeted for demise. It's almost as if we know that it may not change tomorrow, it may not change the day after, but change will come because we've seen it before. It's an affirmation for our humanity and our contributions to society and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression every single day. And so to be young and to be a student and to still fight the good fight means so much, because you're influencing other people to do the same. At the first protest that we had, the name Let's Walk to Justice itself wasn't established yet. One of the journalists, she was a student as well, and she came up to me, and she said, "What's the name of this organization?" It was like on the spot. We didn't have a name. That was just, four of us just making change. And so I was just like, let's walk to justice, because that's really what it was. And since then, from May to even now, we've held different initiatives, not only in the state of New Jersey, but from New York City with Elijah protesting for him. And his was from Colorado, but they had a protest in New York City. And we spoke there. So from there all the way to Maryland, the March on Washington, we've been present, and we hold different Feed the Homeless initiative. We hold different clothing during COVID initiatives. That was one of our largest that we had. We actually was able to have more than 5,000 articles of clothing that were donated to us from different organizations and people that we gave out to homeless people in downtown Newark, and also in Queens, Bronx, and Brooklyn, New York. And so that just being able to be a part of a change, being able to be a part of a movement, it means a lot, especially being so young. But it doesn't stop here. I can definitely say I noticed a large change from the beginning in May. In May, everything was happening. There's protests every single day. I'm really into like data and everything like that. So from a Times analysis, they mentioned that 4,700 protests happened since May 26th after the George Floyd incident. So on average, that was 140 protests per day happening nationwide. And so just to know that was sparking movements here, there, everywhere across the entire nation, that meant so much. But I can definitely say I did notice a decrease. I noticed a significant change in the amount of protests that were happening. That doesn't mean they're still not happening. People are still protesting, but during that time, I think that the anger and just everything at once really made us push for change. Another thing that I'm seeing now more than ever are our allies, or people who are, I'll skip. I did want to show the video. It's like 3 minutes. Yeah, I just want to say quickly about our allies that they are showing up more than usual. They're showing face, and it takes for them to tell a friend, because we may be able to get through to our people, but it takes for them to get through to theirs. I just want to show a short clip. Actually, it's taking a little bit long, so we can just skip on the video. But basically, the video is just highlighting different protests around the world. I just wanted to close my remarks with saying that being an activist and being involved in the community, when it comes to change, it feels good. It's actually fun, like to go out there and meet so many people. You're networking with people. I met Dr. Kill at a protest, at that same protest I met him at. So just to network with other people who have the same goal as you means so much, because then you're able to have that same power in numbers. Young people, the youth, we have the voice. We're energetic and unapologetic, but that doesn't mean that we don't need the guidance from those who came before us to pave the way. So soon we'll be hitting the streets again. We're back in the streets. The fight never stops. It never stops. And I just would like to lastly close with a quote from Martin Luther King from 1963. And he said, "There's power in unity and there's power in numbers." He said that in May 1963 at his Keep On Moving speech. And that definitely pushes me to go each and every day. So thank you again, Dr. Kalfani, for giving me this opportunity to speak.
Yes, you're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Let's give both the young folks a round of applause up here. I did an amazing job. I appreciate you both. And you can call on me and everybody else you see on the screen. Call on them. Larry, Patrice, Linda. We're all here to help in any way possible. So I just wanted to give you a little flavor for the protests happening around the world. You can see that this was not just in Paris, France. It happened all over in the United Kingdom. It happened in Africa. It happened in Asia. There were protests all around the world. And in New Jersey, there were protests, many protests throughout the months. Some weekends had over 200 different protests going on simultaneously in a single weekend in New Jersey. Lets you know the level of frustration, but also the level of commitment to change, right? So with that understanding, I want to bring on now Professor Penderhughes, Dr. Charles Penderhughes, and he's going to talk a little bit about his experience not necessarily, last week he talked about being as a Black Panther, but he's really going to talk to us about, well, I'm gonna let him say what he's going to talk about. It's really interesting, and maybe you haven't heard about it. So without further ado, Dr. Penderhughes.
Thank you. So in past years, when I've spoken publicly about my participation in the civil rights movement and the Black Power movements in the 60s and 70s, often some youth would express desire for the chance to participate in such times. Very often it would be wishing to go back to that era. I would point out that your generation has not yet written its history. You have plenty of time to engage in social change and make your mark. Well, the explosion of last June, supercharged by the widely viewed video of the murder of George Floyd, stirred activists here and around the world, and in the process created a new chapter in the activist work in progress that is the history of the people of the United States and the world. Many of those past chapters were written by youth, and with earnest concern for immediate change, sometimes a fresh idealism that's determined to make a difference, and a commitment to dynamic and radical transformation. Yet, most of our history books used in K-12 education avoid detailed discussion of the waves upon waves of insurgency that have characterized the last 400 years of people's opposition to oppression and what is now the continental United States, as well as explosive protest movements around the world. Last September, President Trump tried to launch a so-called patriotic education project, attempting to bury stories of mass movements and popular resistance that should, in my view, be the main thrust of American history. In his so-called patriotic education press conference, Trump singled out Howard Zinn, his classic book, A People's History of the United States and Zinn's Legacy, the Zinn Education Project, which strives to bring mass movements throughout American history from before Columbus to the present into K-12 classrooms and beyond. Be sure to check out A People's History to see previous versions of today's social movements. And by the way, the online PDF of the entire book is free. In truth, we don't know when a social storm is coming until it's already here, and we won't be able to predict exactly what form the upsurge will take. But as long as we are oppressed, we will resist oppression and raise voices with our demands for change. Du Bois described the action of 500,000 slaves who left their plantations when they heard the Union armies was near, from early to throughout the Civil War. He called their initiative a general strike. Our determination has resulted in the greatest internal migration in the history of our country, with over 6 million people leaving brutal feudal South, leaving the brutal feudal South for points north. There was also the international awakening of 2/3 of the world population that was victimized by European colonialism, demanding their independence after World War II. Sometimes our rising energy is channeled into electoral politics, such as the Jesse Jackson campaigns of '84 and the '88, and Obama's election and re-election, or even the 2020 electoral reaction to Trump. But not only can we demand change with the persistence of the Black Lives Matter movement from 2013 to present, sometimes we can even be persuaded to focus our upsurge inwardly. As the great Black historian John Heinrich Clarke said about the Million Man March, how do you march on Washington? To protest yourselves. But even when we are not able to make the absolute most of a current opportunity, there will be another. We should strive to learn from our most recent popular explosion so that we can help the next one be bigger and more effective. When I was 33, I worked with an old activist in his 80s named Harry Haywood, author of several books on the liberation struggle of Black Americans. Some of his books are still in print today. Harry would always say it's our duty to be ready as activists to help push the people's movements as far as they can go, lending experience to these new battles and consistent commitments to long struggles. Harry also expressed solidarity and internationalism as a critical component for strengthening our mass movement. And he regarded the important summing up of both shortcomings and successes to better focus the future fight. I've learned that whenever possible, we need to exact a political or an economic consequence for our protest to achieve the best results. I know many of you heeded the call to action last summer, regardless of the concerns around Corona. Others of you may have held back, perhaps to avoid endangering an older family member. Regardless of your situation, it's important that you somehow stay connected and stay in motion. But whether you are marching in the streets, packing refreshments for long actions, or organizing by phone, know that your efforts are helping bring complete social justice for all of us a step closer. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Let's give Professor Penderhughes a virtual round of applause. Thank you once again. So now, Shadiqa, do we get any questions? If anybody has any questions, put them in the chat for us, and Shadiqa will read them, and we can make those connections. We have a few minutes left. I want to thank everybody who joined us. Before I move in, oh, I'm sorry, I need to make a quick announcement, or I need to have Professor Slade make a quick announcement about student life and activities. I apologize. I almost slipped my mind. We're moving forward.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much, Dr. Kilfani. What a wonderful program. It's so good to see our young folks and our senior folks talk about how they've moved through this social justice system for so long. And it shows us that we do have a very deep history and we have a very promising future. So it's so good to be here and listen to what everyone has to say. On tomorrow, Student Life and Activities, along with the entire college institution, we're going to host another program talking about how history is made and how you as young folks can become a part of that history. What part will you play when we have these conversations in the future? So it's called The Art of Making History. It's going to be presented by Gio DeRice. And if you recall, Gio DeRice is our speaker who comes and does our Student Success Day. So he's very familiar with us. He's very familiar with our students. So he will be here tomorrow on Zoom at 2:30. The Zoom information is available on our website. And he's going to do a little inspirational twist on history. I think he's going to talk about three of our most commonly known or most commonly prominent, Dr. King, Harriet Tubman, and the last one escapes me, but how their historical figures and how they created a positive change. So we look forward to visiting with you again tomorrow. And again, Dr. Kilfani and the Social Justice Committee, we thank you for all of your hard work and we appreciate this time.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate you. So I want to thank all the organizers in the Social Justice Council who have been instrumental in making these events happen. We know that each one of these iterative programs that we've had has been a lot of folks, takes a lot of hard work and time to do it. So we thank Professor Penderhughes, Professor Steplight Johnson, Professor Davis, Professor Clark, Carter, I'm sorry, Sadiqa Horge, and everybody else who makes that happen. You know, the Social Justice Council has many folks in it, and we want to thank all of them who are engaged, and the organizations that made this possible: the Africana Institute, Academic Affairs, Student Life, Student Services, and Institutional Development. Patrice, anybody else I'm forgetting? I know I'm forgetting somebody in there.
IT.
IT, okay.
Marketing.
Okay. So all of those who helped to make this possible, we thank them. There's a question in the chat. Shadiqua, can you do the honors for us?
Yes. First, Linda had some comments, but Diana just said thank you to everyone. And yes, thank you to all the presenters. There were 2 comments, and then Professor Dr. Davis shared some wonderful links. But Linda wanted to know, please address the role of the corporate media in deflecting and diverting the public from paying attention to the protest. Also, how to get the corporate media to pay attention to the protest.
Those are long questions. Maybe Larry can take the latter one, address it briefly. Larry, you still with us?
I'm still with you. The corporate media. Is the second part of the question and how to get the corporate media to pay attention to you?
Yes, how to get them engaged in the protest and struggle, or how to get them to respond and cover the work that's done by organizations like yourself.
Right. Well, the good news is we have social media because the corporate media is not good when it comes to covering grassroots upheavals. There's an old saying in the newspaper business: if it bleeds, it leads. So that means unless you're dealing with the death of somebody or the deaths of a group of people, it's going to be very difficult to get the attention of social media. But I will say this: having good writing skills is important to getting media coverage. Every group should have people within it that know how to write a press release. And writing a press release is very different than writing a term paper or writing an essay. A press release has to be very concise. It has to get right to the business of who, what, why, when, and where. Because every corporate media outlet gets thousands of press releases every day. So if you don't say everything they need to know in the first sentence, you're putting your efforts at risk, in jeopardy. So there's plenty of literature on how to write press release. In fact, there's a whole school of literature now on grassroots organizing. And almost all the books you would get on grassroots organizing would have a chapter on dealing with the media and will show you how to write a good press.
Okay, I think.
But really, the essence of it is to study journalism: who, what, why, and where. If you get those in, so then writing good press release, having a good media list, having specific contacts within each corporate media entity, and being able to get those press releases out in a timely fashion. If you send them the day of, you're likely not going to get coverage. You have to send them at least 1 or 2 days in advance, and then follow up with phone calls. So it's very hard to get media coverage, but you should try. Everybody should try. It's a roll of the dice. Most of what pop doesn't get covered by the corporate media, but then.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Can you go to there's a
yes,
student?
The last question.
It's really also be able of. Go ahead.
Larry, we're gonna go to there's a student who had a question, and then Professor Penhughes wanted to kind of address something, but let's see if we can get the students' question addressed.
Yes, this the last question does lead us into our next week's session. The question was, wanted to know, there was a recent article that stated 6,000 arrests of New Jersey residents due to marijuana possession. They're only assuming that the majority were Black and brown people. After the bill was passed, it still hasn't been finalized. Where do we go from here, and what actions do we take? How do we actively protest this issue effectively?
Good question.
And I think maybe we could speak on that, maybe also next week's presentation a little bit, the power of the vote.
Yep. Larry, you want to take a hit at that? I mean, that's, yeah.
Let somebody else take a hit.
Okay. I mean, I would just say quickly that thinking about the of that is that, you know, there are a bunch of organizations out there already organizing on these issues, and one of the things that Kwame Ture used to always say is that you know, that it doesn't matter what organization you're in, you're not meant to be in his, but get in an organization. So being involved in an organization that if that's an issue that's pertinent to or important to you, get in an organization that's addressing that issue. And if you don't see one, start one, and then begin to do, but there are a bunch out there, and begin to do work on the issues related to that, and push the envelope, right? You know, all these arrests is definitely an issue. And we have two lawyers on here too who might want to say a word or two on it.
On I'm sorry, I was distracted. What was the question?
Marijuana and all the arrests, even though the laws passed, arrests that have been going on, and then there's no where do we stand with the finalization of the legalization of marijuana, and the basically that was the question.
The part I know about, I've been indirectly keeping up with it, and I just got a email a couple of days that one has to do with the fact it still retains a penalty from 200, and they're reducing the penalty, but that doesn't change the possibility that Black and brown and marginalized people are going to still be caught up, because even though it's been so-called decriminalized, the fact is that if you don't pay, you're going to end up with a warrant. And if you don't show up to court, you got all these issues that are going to happen again. For those of you who don't know, and I would tell you to look at it, at one point, primarily Black and Puerto Ricans ran a particular industry called the numbers game. And what happened years later and during your time is that the numbers game, which was pretty much controlled by people of color, and made a lot of people middle class in the community, was taken over and turned into a lottery. And so there's a fear that we're looking at the same game plan now. When we were involved in it, it was criminal. Now you're changing it, and it's big business. I can tell you real quickly that I wasn't able to attend New Jersey PAC, but they had an event on New Jersey PAC. It was $500 for you to even go to this, to find out what was going to go on in the first place. And most of the people who showed up were about 80% Russian. So that just kind of tells you that this bill is not necessarily meant to be in our favor. People need to stay on top of it, watch it very closely, because it's going to still have a major, from where I sit as the phone call, I'm sorry, the email I got the other day, it's still going to be detrimental to us. That's all I have right now.
And the only way that changes is by you exercising your voice
and paying attention.
Right. All right, everybody. I think we are over time. Unless there's an urgent emergency or pressing question or comment, I think we're going to call it a day.
I'm going to quickly ask to make a comment. I didn't give an example of when I said exacting a political and economic consequence is the most important. We saw it a little bit last summer with the sports world, the NFL kicking Kaepernick to the curb, and then all of a sudden they're embracing social justice, and they faux apologize. But back in the classic example is 68. King is killed, 130 cities burned at the same time, and that's when we get the beginning of Black people on national television as anchors and reporters. And that's when multiple consent decrees in major industries were conducted. I was a steel worker, so I know about steel, but I know that there are other industries that happened in. And that happened because of what happened in '68 after King was killed.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I want to thank everybody once again. Next week is the power of the vote. So we want you to make sure you tune in. It's going to be at 7 p.m. Next week. So this is for the evening students. Tell your friends and invite them. Let them know that we're going to have a great event. And even this evening, I want to make an announcement that there's I'm doing a program this evening on a tour of the Africana Institute. It's a virtual event. And we're going to recast that next week. But, you know, there's a lot of other things going on. And this is also a Coma week. So a Coma Day week. So it's an African-American alternative to Valentine's. So if you haven't seen any of that information, let me know and I'll send it out to you. But happy Acoma Day. And thank you again, Larry Ham, Dr. Penny Hughes, Amira Jabbar, and Rostafa. Have a good afternoon, everybody. Talk to you soon.